Yo guys, and welcome back to the channel. Hope you guys are doing fantastic as usual. And today we're going to be continuing on with the To-Do application just like usual. And I feel like we have actually implemented a lot of the functionality that I had imagined in the first place for a To-Do application. Of course, it doesn't look amazing. We can always style it into oblivion, also add features into Oblivion, but I'm kind of running out of features to add. I don't have a lot of ideas of what to add in the upcoming episodes. It's all a bit subjective as well on what kind of features you want in your To-Do application. So if you have some great ideas of what you would like to see, if you have some super cool special function that you want to add, feel free to comment and let me know. We also have some cleaning up to do, of course, with accessibility and stuff like that. And I feel like we should probably, handle that in the upcoming videos as well. But what I'm trying to say is that there's not a lot more functionality to add, I feel like. We could probably, release this application. I feel like this is definitely a minimum viable product. But of course, not every single application needs to be released. It can also be just for your own personal use. If you don't really have that unique selling point, then there are like a million To-Do applications out there. So I'm just trying to be real here that maybe there's not a super large market, but of course, if you have some amazing functionalities that no one else has thought of, or if you're gonna, sell it dirt cheap, or if you're a real entrepreneur, perhaps you have some amazing ideas on how to sell your product. But what I'm trying to say is that there's not a lot of more functionalities that I'm looking to implement. I feel like we should also, of course, venture a bit into the server side of things. Perhaps we should have a look at Svelte and other more full stack solutions where we can actually implement stuff on the server as well. So we can have a web server running. So perhaps we can use it for storage, but also for other functionalities such as authentication and stuff like that. And I feel like looking at Svelte is of course really relevant now since we're doing a lot of Svelte, and Svelte is also quite awesome. So everything that is Svelte is awesome. Of course, there are a lot of other choices out there as well. So we can have a look at some other programming languages, perhaps something like Golang I've been looking at a bit, and perhaps PHP. We can look at C#. If you have some really good idea in mind, feel free to comment. If you have some backend framework that you would like to see, feel free to comment that as well. It's always nice to learn new things, learn new technologies, because chances are you're gonna find something that you love. Just like I love Svelte, you can also find something for the backend to use that you will love and appreciate working with. So it's important to not get stuck with one backend language that you feel comfortable with, but perhaps not completely happy with. So there's a lot of choices out there, and they all have their, advantages and disadvantages. So it's always good to have a bit of a check, keep yourself updated, especially if you have been programming for a longer time. It's always good to, get out there and see what's new and, try out new things, and perhaps it will make you a better programmer. I feel like there's a lot to take from these new frameworks. Everyone has some cool idea. You can take bits and pieces from different frameworks and apply it to your own ideas. But for this episode, I feel like we should look a bit at right-clicking stuff. So I feel like that's a nice way to make your app stand out a bit more. When you have right-click, it makes your app feel like it's more native, like you're actually in an operating system or like a normal, native application on your computer. So if you can handle this right-click and actually show a menu that you created yourself, I feel like that would be quite nice. I feel like it would be nice for this sidebar here in particular. So you could do something like clicking here. You have this native Firefox, really ugly, unuseful context menu currently. Wouldn't it be quite nice if we could have a custom menu here, so you can do something like delete or perhaps rename if you don't want to click in and rename it here. We could do something cool. The real problem with this, I really wanted to put the rename functionality here as well, but we couldn't do that since we need to be able to click the text here without it going completely bananas. So it would be nice, wouldn't it, to have like a right click here that we can click, and then we click like rename, and then we can actually start renaming it and like automatically focusing on that text or something like that. I feel like that would be quite nice. So something like looking at custom context menus. I've actually never done this before, so why not learn together? That's what it's all about on this channel. But I have some ideas on how perhaps it could be implemented, but maybe I'm completely wrong. So let's start Googling. That's how we do it on this practical coding channel. So if I search for something like custom context menu JavaScript, let's see what we can find here. So how to create a custom right-click menu with JavaScript. Let's have a look at this one. And of course, it's premium. That's quite a shame. Let's find something else then. Custom right-click context menu in JavaScript. Let's see here, we have some HTML code. So this is what I thought. You would have some HTML code and perhaps you do something like, position absolute or position fixed or something like that. And then you can position it at where the user clicked, and then you just, disable the normal context menu. That is at least how I thought it was implemented. So let's see if it's somewhere along that way or if I'm completely wrong about that. So we have some visibility hidden, then we have position fixed, and then I guess we can handle context menu. So we add an event listener to context menu and touch start. All right, then we get the mouse position, we get some weird menu width and height. Okay, we're doing loads of stuff here. Really complicated. I think we can actually handle this a bit nicer. I feel like they have been a bit verbose here perhaps, but perhaps it's about being responsive and stuff like that. So let's see here. Yeah, so here they set that context menu style top. I don't feel like we need to change the border radius, but other than that, all they do, is prevent default. And that's what I'm trying to say here, is that we listen to this context menu event. This context menu event is called whenever you right click on something in the browser. And then we can simply use prevent default to prevent, the default action. The default action here is actually, to show this native context menu, this inspect element, take screenshot, copy, whatever it said, and then we just prevent that from happening, and then we just draw and add our own custom context menu with the help of, a normal HTML element. Let's have a look at some other alternatives to just get a better feel for how it's done normally, So yeah, this is exactly what I want. We have some menu items. I guess this is a library then, perhaps. CSS script. All right, then we have a context menu. Okay, this seems quite nice, but I don't like this kind of website, so let's skip that one. Custom right-click context menu JavaScript. Video tutorial context menu JavaScript. Yeah, it's actually the same code. So let's search for right-click menu JavaScript. So add custom right-click menu to a web page. Yeah, so you try to open it. The same thing here, really. We're doing prevent default, and then we're on our own when it comes to creating this actual menu that we are going to show. Of course, that's both a pro and a con because we have full control over this. But of course, it's quite cumbersome to create our own divider and start styling it and position fixed. But of course, we also get a bit more control over. We can completely style it how we want. So there's both pros and cons, and maybe this is not actually what the browser intends or wants you to do. Of course, the browser kind of wants you to use the default context menu. There are of course times when a custom right-click menu is nice to have, so why not try it out? Let's also search for Svelte. If there's some built-in way, I really don't think so, but why not have a quick look? So maybe there is some nice REPL. Yeah, exactly what I'm trying to look for. You have a nice menu here. I really like that one. The actual menu is here, I assume. Svelte body on page click. So this is where they actually handle that. We have the on context menu and then the event attribute or the event modifier prevent default, which we can also use, of course. So we don't need to call it immediately in the function handler or event handler. We can just do prevent default and add like that immediately here. That's kind of nice. So where I wanted to add this mainly was the sidebar actually, so that you can just right click here and have some nice actions. So let's have a look here for that. We have main and we have the sidebar and we have the board list. Yeah, that's exactly right. So these things definitely need their own components. Why not make a component for this right away, I feel like. So if I just create a new directory for this now called sidebar. So we'll put all the sidebar good stuff in here. Let's move that, yeah. So we have the sidebar here and now we have a board list and now we have like a board list item. Kind of verbose there, but always good to be more clear than unclear. So let's copy this into a component, make a component for that instead. So we have like a board list item instead, and let's move that in there. And what do we take in? We have a current board ID and we have board, and that's about it. And we also have select board. So kind of want to dispatch that. We can just do something like this on click, and we can just move that over with event forwarding in Svelte. So we just forward it on to the parent component if we don't, write a handler here. So that's quite nice. And then we can do this script lang ts, write some simple props here. So we can do something like export let current board ID, which would be a string. And then we can export the board here. So it will be a to-do board, I believe. Or not a to-do board. The to-do board is actually the component. So what is this actually called? To-do item? To-do data board? I'm not even sure anymore. To-do task board, of course. Task board, I should have known. Task board, there we go. And that's about it. Other than that, it's just accessibility stuff, which we will cover very soon, actually. And so for these, we loop over the boards array and we create a new board list item for all of them. And then we can just pass in the board here. We're not going to be mutating it here, so we're just going to be doing one-way data binding here. And let's do some importing here. Maybe it does not want to import, actually. Okay, it's actually imported already. It's just complaining about something else, and it's the current board ID. So let's do the same thing here. Just a quick shorthand here so that we don't have to write the same thing twice. And then we can save that. Nothing going on here. We have board list. Okay, so cannot find module here. The board list is actually not working out. So it's actually in the same folder now. Let's see that. There we go. Alright, so now we have the board list, and then we also have a nice little board list item that we can manage now. Isn't that nice? We can also split up these lines a bit more so that I can see what's going on. Alright then, so let's create an event handler for this. We can create something like function on right click, which we will handle whenever the user right clicks on this to-do board item or this, sidebar item here. Then we can do something like on context menu. So the vanilla event for right-clicking something is called context menu. So that context menu event is called whenever you right-click on a DOM element. So we can do on context menu, then we can do prevent default. So we prevent the default here, which is showing that native browser context menu. But we don't want that. We want to have our own context menu. So we do prevent default there, and then we can bind this to on right-click. Let's see now then, if I add a quick little debug here, so on right click, let's see if that works. Boom, on right click, and we don't see any native. If I just remove this, you can see if I start right clicking there, nothing happens anymore. So we just remove that completely. But of course, this is only on that element. So if I right click somewhere else, of course, the normal context menu is still available there. So that's nice to know. So now we actually need to handle rendering the actual context menu, which will be the hardest part here, I feel like. And I'm not really sure how to structure this. We could definitely put it in the same, component here, but I feel like we're only gonna have one context menu, shown at one time. So we're gonna probably just gonna put it in more like app.svelte, and then perhaps we can do something like a store or something. Have I shown stores even? I don't even think I have shown stores yet. That's a bit strange. But we haven't actually had a need for a store yet because we haven't really been talking with components in that way. We've been using event dispatchers for the most part. I kind of don't like using it because I'm more of a object-oriented guy. I like the object-oriented way of not, exposing everything. You kind of expose a lot when you're working with stores because you're probably going to expose it to all the components. All of them can import that and do whatever they please with it, and not really something I like that much. But you can of course use stores if you have like really deeply nested, which is not really, but it's in sidebar, which is in a to-do board list, and then it's in a board list item. So it would be quite cumbersome here to use like event dispatchers to dispatch that. Now I want a context menu. Let's try creating the component first. So we're just gonna be rendering it like here or something. And let's just style it a bit now and get comfortable with that first. So if I create a component first, we can just do something like context menus, and then we can create a new file in here, context menu. I feel like we're probably not going to have any other context menus in the sidebar, so it will be a pretty clear name of where that is coming from. So we have a sidebar context menu. Let's just make a divider here for that then. And then we can use, of course, Tailwind CSS here as well. So we can do something like fixed, which will make, position fixed. So we can have it anywhere we want on the page, even on top of other elements. And then we can also do sed here. So we can actually have the sed index. And that is something we want to, position it and show it on top of other items. So let's try doing that. Sed 10 will be sed index 10, I believe. And let's just write some debug text there. And then let's put that in app there. So in body, we want to show that the sidebar context menu. Let's see if that works, and yes it does. So now if I just do some top here, let's try if I use top 60, yeah, and then I can do left 60 as well. So if you don't know, this is more the absolute positioning in CSS, where you can position it based on actual values from top, left, bottom, and right. 15 rem, so it's 15 rem from the right and then 15 rem from the top as well. So we can also do some like BG white here to actually give it a background there. There we go. And then we can also give it a bit of padding, of course, padding 4 perhaps. Let's add some rounding to it. Maybe we have like some, maybe we have some border for it, or maybe it's just border, and then we can do border gray 300, I think we used. Yeah, that's about it. And let's just change this up a bit. If I do left 40 and top 40, so I'm just kind of positioning where I would imagine it to be when I click, right click on that board item. So if I do top 30, left 30 as well. Okay, that did not work. That was not a valid one. 32, yeah, that one works. So that's about it. So this is when I imagine clicking on it like here or something. Then I want this to show here. And what do I want to show here then? Well, I want to show rename and delete. So let's try adding that. So of course we're gonna be using my darling flexbox here to have like a column layout, a vertical layout. So we can do flex, flex, and flex call. Then we can add some items in here. So we can do some like div. We're just gonna put some dividers. We're gonna turn them into components later on. So we can do something like div, and then we can write something like rename and delete. Let's see if that works. Yeah, that looks really bad, but we're gonna change it up, of course. I feel like the padding is a bit too much here actually, so let's do padding 2. Yeah, I feel like that looks better. And perhaps we can have some gap between these items, so flex call gap 2. Yeah, that's a bit too much actually. I feel like gap 1 would be nice. There we go. That's quite nice. And then we can do something like hover BG gray 100, so we can add some nice hover effects to them. Let's add that to this one as well. Loads of code duplication now, but okay, that looks really bad. I think it's due really to that padding there, so I feel like we should remove that from the actual, or maybe we can do something like PY here, so we have like a vertical padding, but then the components themselves will have the horizontal padding. So let's see if that looks better. Yeah, there we go. That's a bit more like it. Maybe it still looks a bit weird though. I'm not really sure. How does this look? Okay, so let's just remove the padding altogether. They can have their own padding, I guess, the items themselves. I feel like that could be better. Yeah, that looks much better. It's kind of weird to have a top padding if we're gonna have like hover effects and stuff like that. So I feel like that looks quite nice. Maybe we can do something like PY1 instead. Yeah, that's a bit more like it. Maybe even more further here. Let's make it a bit longer here, a bit wider. That looks pretty nice, I feel like. So we can go with that for sure. So I guess we can create a new directory for that as well, since we're gonna be adding another component in there. So you can structure it a little bit. So context menu, sidebars, and then in here we want to add another component actually, which will be the context menu. Well, this will actually kind of be a general component actually. I think we can actually use this, reuse this in multiple context menus. So why not do that? If I do something like a context menu item, I feel like our context menu items will be pretty similar really. Even the context menu itself, I don't think I'm gonna have like a million different variations. So it kind of depends. If currently we only have this context menu, so it doesn't really matter. Always good to have a general approach in mind if you have ideas about using it multiple places later on, but let's just do a context menu item for now. So let's copy this in there, and then we can just expose that name here as a prop instead. So we can do script lang ts name, and this will be a string, and then we can render that there with that prop. So in here now we can instead just use the nice context menu item, which is much nicer. And then we can do something like a name here and use this instead. So rename will be the name here. Let's see if I can import that. No, I cannot. Okay, let's see. Context menu item. There we go. And it's still broke. Why did it break? Sidebar context menu. Okay, it's because I moved it into the directory here. So let's see. It will be context menus sidebar actually. So why is it breaking? Sidebar, does the file exist? let's see if I can import that again and see why that is breaking so much. Now it worked out. Not sure what the difference was really, but all right. So now we have that rendered there. So let's handle now actually, clicking on it and showing it. Let's add that back though. So we can have delete here as well, of course. Just so that we have a bit more to show. There we go, nice. Now let's actually handle the most complicated part of actually positioning it where we click. So, and also opening it will be a bit of a challenge. So where are we going to handle this? We're going to be starting off in the board list item. This is where we have this on right click. So we want to trigger something. When we right click on this, we want to show a context menu. And this context menu will be positioned, absolutely. So it will be absolute screen coordinates really. So we need to know kind of where the user clicked, and I think we can actually get that information from the event. So let's see if I log out this event. I think we can actually get that information from the event. So if I log that here, we can see here that we have client X and client Y, and I'm pretty sure that that is actually the absolute coordinates. It doesn't make sense for this to be like inside of the relative to the element or anything. So it makes sense that this is the really absolute screen coordinates, or not the absolute screen coordinates, but more the viewport coordinates. So in the browser window, client X95 would probably be somewhere here, if it were the screen coordinates, but this is more inside of the browser. So we actually have access to that. We have access to e.clientx and e.clienty, which will give us the screen coordinates, and that's all we really need to know. So let's now think about how we're gonna be opening this. So I feel like we should use a store for this. It makes the most sense. So we don't actually have any stores yet. And I haven't actually gone through this. I haven't mentioned it in a couple of videos, but we never got around to implement it really. So stores in Svelte is really just a way to, store data and, share that data and reactivity, specifically the reactivity that is shared between multiple components. So whenever a value changes in this store, it is reflected in multiple components. So you can subscribe to a store and actually, notice when something has changed. You can have like a variable that is global. It's more like a global scope where you have like variables that can change. You can change the variables, you can reassign the variables, and you can know when they have changed in multiple components. And it's really, really cool. And it's also really easy to work with, of course, since it's Svelte. So we can do something like export const rather. It's going to be a constant variable. And then we want to do something like, actually naming it. So we're going to name it something. We can do something like sidebar context menu. So I'm just going to do this kind of, naively now. We're just going to have one. We're probably just going to switch this out to a more general approach in the future where we can just, assign to some context menu variable, and then it will just magically show different context menus. But we're just going to have this for now. And then we have writable. So this is actually writable Svelte store. So now we actually create a store. This is where we can actually store a value that we want to be reactive in multiple components. And the first parameter here is the default value for this store, and I feel like this should be null here actually, so we don't want to show this. So what will the actual type for this variable be? Well, I think there's actually something called writable, and then this is actually a generic. So if I do something like writable of null, this is what we have currently. But we want to have, instead of null here, we want to have something like the coordinates or something. So if I can do something like a number array, so this will be an array which have two, well, okay, it's going to be null or number. So this will be either null, or it's going to be an array that has two elements that both are going to be numbers. So that is the kind of the type that I'm thinking in TypeScript. So if you're not using TypeScript, you don't need to think about this at all. So take that how you want. But now we have that. So number, this will be X and this will be Y. So board list item, we're just gonna set to that. So when it comes to stores, there's actually a kind of a special syntax. So we're actually gonna be using the $ syntax again, which we are familiar with. We have been using it for the other reactive stuff. So it's more of a way to tell the Svelte compiler that something is reactive here. And specifically, we're going to import that constant. It's going to be a global constant, but it's not going to be constant. You know, the actual variable is not going to be reassigned, but the value inside of the store is. So we can do something like $, and then we write the actual variable name here, which will be the sidebar context menu, which we now import here, normal module import here. With the help of this $sign, we tell the Svelte compiler here that we have a sidebar context menu that is a store, and that we want to now be able to reassign. So if I reassign it to something now, if I just do e.clientx and e.clienty, let's try that out actually. Boom. So now we actually have reassigned to that, and absolutely nothing will happen since we're not handling it anywhere, but we can do that now in sidebar context menus. If I do name here, and if I try using this, we can actually use this right away here, and this will not actually work. So since this has the same name as the component here, so that's kind of a shame. So let's just call it sidebar menu for now, since we can't really have the same name. That's kind of stupid, but if I remove context from the name here, so we have just sidebar menu instead, then we can use that here. So sidebar menu, perhaps we can import it now. Let's see, import from stores, yes. So we can just use it like a normal variable here if we use the $sign. So it's important here to use the $sign to tell the Svelte compiler that it's going to be reactive here. So sidebar menu, and then it will be, you know, at 0 here, since this is an array actually. So name here, it's gonna break now since we have assigned this to be like a string. So since we have assigned this to be a string, so we can do something like toString, and that should solve it hopefully. Let's see if that will actually work. I'm not sure if that's gonna work being reactive. Let's see, it kind of broke completely now. So sidebar context menu, yeah, of course, since it's null, so we don't want to show this unless it actually has a value. So if it's null, then we don't want to show it. So let's just do that, wrap it in an if statement. Boom, let's see if it works now. No, it doesn't. And of course we want to have the $sign here so that actually uses the actual value, not the constant there. So now let's see, does it work? And yes, it does. Isn't that amazing? So now we actually get the screen coordinates, and that should be 1, of course. There we go. Now we actually get the screen coordinates of where I click now. It shows that here in numbers. So we took values from one component, and you know, we shoved it over into some global scope, and now the other component knows about it. So now we can actually use that, but how are we gonna use it then? So this is kind of the problem now, since we have a store. We don't really know, unless, you know, we can reactively check that, yeah, this has changed, and then we want to, you know, do something. I feel like that's what we're going to be doing now, but I've done this before, and it kind of leads to some issues, you know, especially if like multiple levels to it, and if you're going to be changing it from multiple components, it kind of gets messy, but you can actually listen for it. So just like we do in other components where we have this magic syntax, we can look for changes in the store this way. And there's actually also a function for this, so that we can use, but we can do it this way with this magic syntax and have a function that listens for whenever that changes. So let's try that as well. So if I do something like on sidebar menu change or something, then we can pass in that array, so menu, and then we can do something like $sign reactive syntax, so on sidebar menu change, and then we pass in that sidebar menu store. There we go. Now we can log that out, so we will now know whenever that changes, and that's when we want to listen to it, of course. So now we can see we get some values whenever I right click here. You can also see that it will send the first value, which will be null, so we kind of need to handle that. So if menu is null, we can do something like return, and we can also type annotate this so it will be null, or this nice number thing we got going. So there we go, that should be the proper type for that. But the question is if we actually need to know this, if we actually need to know when it changed. Maybe we can just use the class here. Let's try doing that. If I can just use the values immediately here, let's see if that will work. So if I just do something like style, then I do top here, and then we can do sidebar menu at 0 to string, and this will be pixels. It's kind of getting a bit tight there, I can't see what it says. Style, there, sidebar menu, there we go. And then we want to use the y value as well. So, well, this will be the actual left value, so top 1, and then the left here will be the x value. Let's see why that is breaking. It's because it's not capitalized properly. Sidebar menu. Let's see now. If I remove this reactive syntax here, will it work? Boom. Let's see now. Will it work? Yes, it will. Wow, I did not expect it to work that flawlessly. Holy. We're just using the value here. We're just assigning this in the style here. So we're using the style attribute and we just set the CSS values left and top to be X and Y. So left here is X and top is Y. And it just works. It is now where I click the mouse. Isn't that amazing? So really great. That was much easier than I actually anticipated it being. So we looked at that fat solution with vanilla JavaScript and it had like 100 lines of code, but with Svelte, of course, we can just use some beloved syntax that is just amazing. With the help of Svelte, we can implement it so easily and straightforward. Of course, we also need to handle now when we click somewhere else on the page. So that's also kind of important. If I click somewhere else on the page, I don't want that context menu lingering around, but that should hopefully also be pretty easy. So I think we can do something like that in app.svelte. If I handle this here, I think we can do something with Svelte body, but we actually have a body here already, and it's kind of a bad body because we have multiple bodies, don't we? We have one body here and then we have another body inside of app. Like I said, this is completely stupid. So let's move this into divider instead. We have a divider instead of the body. It doesn't make sense to have multiple bodies, and it didn't seem to break anything really. Let's see. Yeah, we're not really doing anything stupid anyways, so we want that to be a divider, of course, but we want to be able to have that body, and we can actually handle that with Svelte body, I believe. So this will give us access to the body, and here we can do stuff like assigning event handlers, and that is what we want to do. So whenever we click on the body, I think we can do that here. So on click, so on body click. Let's see here, click. Now I'm not sure if this will trigger whenever we click anywhere on the page. That is kind of what I'm assuming. So let's see if I click somewhere here, yeah, it says body. If I click here, will it also say body? No, okay. So this is of course whenever you left click. It's just a normal DOM event. It's just a normal click event. So of course it's not calling on context menu since I did not assign that. So we have on click, and that's kind of what I want really. So we want to handle that here, perhaps also on right click. Or does it even matter? I don't feel like it does. So we have left click and that will hide it actually. So yeah, so we can handle this here. We can actually handle this here by just setting it to null. So we have that nice store now that we can access, and we just do sidebar value is null, and now it should hopefully disappear whenever I click, and it did, and boom, it hides. Isn't that amazing? So, but maybe it would be nice to have it for the context menu as well, perhaps. I'm not really sure about that. But perhaps we can solve that if I add it multiple times. So if I do context menu, on context menu, and then we do on body click as well, I'm assuming this will override it kind of, so it won't show anything. Yeah, that's kind of what I thought, but perhaps we can solve this here. If I do something like e.stop propagation, I'm assuming it will work, won't it? Yes, it will. So we're actually stopping the propagation from propagating to, the body. We're clicking on something on the body, and we're stopping that event from propagating to the actual parent here, which is, eventually going to be the body, even though it's like deeply nested in dividers and all kinds of components. But the base component here is HTML really, but we have a body inside there, a body element that receives that event eventually. But we stop the propagation here. We tell it, hey, we want it to stop here. We want to show the sidebar menu. Enough of that. No more propagating that event. So we stop the event there, and then we can simply show the context menu. If I click somewhere else now, boom, it disappears. If I right click here and I click somewhere else, boom, boom, boom. Any kind of action really. So I'm assuming this, yeah, as well will also, any kind of click really. And right click will now remove the sidebar menu. Isn't that amazing? So now the thing that we need to handle is actually, passing the state. We need to know which board item that we have clicked here so that we can handle it. So let's remove that debug information here in the little nice button that we had. So if I rename this to be rename, of course, and then I rename this other to be delete, then hopefully I should be able here to handle this. Now we have rename, we have delete. Whenever I click that, I want to handle that and actually rename it or delete the actual item that I clicked on. And I noticed something also, we want this to be cursor pointer, of course. Since this is just a divider, it will not have that pointer cursor. So there we go, much nicer. So now whenever I click that, we need to know which board item that I clicked this for. And how are we going to handle that? Well, we need to pass that state on to the sidebar, to the store actually. So it will be null or number, and the number will be the coordinates. And then we want to pass in also the board, really, the board that we're going to be deleting or adding. So I guess you can do something like board, well, task board, really. Do we really need to do, like, send in the whole object? That's the question. Maybe we can just, I guess it's nicer to have the access to the whole object, so we can do that. Let's do that here then. So we have sidebar menu, and then here we can actually send in the board since we have access to that already. So nice. Now we should have access to that in the context menu as well. So if I just show this here in a nice way, if I do something like rename plus and then I do sidebar menu, this gets a bit problematic now since we have an array. It would be nicer here to have an object. I feel like we should refactor that later to have an object with X, Y, and the board as properties. But now we can see object, that's not what we want. We want this to be name here. Boom, rename default board, rename another board. We can see now we have access to that. Isn't that amazing? So of course we also here have access to onClick since we exposed that, I believe. Well, we exposed it through event forwarding. So we can do something like on rename, and we can also do on delete. So now we can remove that little debug information there, and then we have the actual function. So let's try it out real quick, see if it works. So rename, boom. If I click that and rename, it will not work actually. Let's see, we're not actually using event forwarding. I was just thinking from another case that we had there. So on click, now we have event forwarding, hopefully. So boom, rename. Now we have some event forwarding. Isn't that amazing? So now we can handle that as well. I feel like the rename is gonna be really difficult. So let's start with the deletion actually. And this is also gonna become a problem really because we need to have some global state or something for that as well. So where are we actually deleting boards? This is in, well, let's trace that. So we have the board, to do board, and then we have the icon here, which will be on board delete, and we just dispatch board delete. Is this handle over here perhaps? Yeah, we're on current board deleted, so it's in app.svelte. So we're actually kind of lucky here. We can just handle that in app.svelte, but of course we shouldn't handle everything in app.svelte. So if it gets like out of hand and we're handling every single thing in app.svelte, then we're not really isolating things properly, and that's not something we want to be doing. But okay, I think it's fine for now. We have on current board deleted, and we don't want that actually. We want to delete a specific board. So I guess we can create a more general function for that. So on board, more board, delete board actually. So this will pass in here will be an ID, yes. So it will be an ID string. Then we can just copy this code here, really, yeah. So this is just where you want to have, instead of current board ID, we just want to do ID, save to the local storage. Is there something else we do? No, not really. So all that we really do here is delete board, current board ID. All the other stuff is already general. So we can just create an event dispatcher for the deletion here. So we can do something like const dispatch, create event dispatcher. On delete, we can do dispatch delete, and then we can pass in, we can pass in the board here. So it will be sidebar menu at, sidebar menu at 2, and then .id, which will give us the ID. So delete, yeah, I think that's fine. So we have app.svelte here, we have the sidebar context menu. So on delete, we want to do, we can have an anonymous function. I feel like that is fine. So we have e here, then we can do delete board and e.detail, which will give us the detail from the event. So let's see if that works. If I try to delete another board, will it remove itself? Yes, it will. Isn't that amazing? Absolutely wonderful. So now we have that implemented. That was quite straightforward, wasn't it? But the actual renaming capabilities, I feel like would be quite difficult. So now we need to have access to the actual component of this button so that we can change the text and do stuff like that. So it's not as simple as having access to some object with an ID inside of it. We actually need to have the real component that is being rendered on the screen. And of course we can solve this problem in multiple ways. We could even pass in the component itself. I think I've done that like one time, but I feel like that is quite of a hacky way to do it. And one way that we learned today is with the help of stores. If we want to communicate between components, we can use a store. And perhaps we can do something like that. So we assign to some store that says that, hey, we want this specific board to be. We can use the ID again. We can just use the same thing here, the ID of the item that we are clicking on, but we can simply check in the actual button, is this, does this belong to me? So for every single component, well, in every single button component, we check, is this the ID that I am handling or the ID that I am rendering? Otherwise, we don't handle it. So I guess we can try that out. And this also becomes a big problem. So I feel like it would be nice then in the future to isolate these stores into a bit more structured approach so that we have some stores for this kind of functionality, so it's not like a big global store with like a million variables inside. I feel like that's a bit nasty. So we can do something like export const rename board button or something that we can rename in the future as well. So writable here will be null, and the string here will be the ID of the board that we are renaming, and writable, the default value will be null, and that should be fine. Yeah, so we have rename, and then we can handle that here in the sidebar context menu. Then we can do something like rename board button, import that one, and then we can set that to the ID here. So sidebar menu at to.id. And then hopefully now in the actual board list item, we can handle that. So we can do something like if rename board button equals board.id. So if rename board button, that button that we have clicked rename on is the board ID that I am. This board list item, if it has the same idea that if it has the same ID that this one is rendering for. So then we can do something like yes. Show yes, and import that as well. So if I click that now, rename, yes, it says. Let's move that into the actual component here. So, and then of course we want to have another border so that we can tell a difference here. So if I now click that, it kind of actually broke. What is that about? All right, that's a bit strange actually. Now I can't switch boards for some reason. Okay. Okay, so I've on-click here, onboard list item, so I kind of removed that. We didn't actually implement that properly, so we want to handle that on-click here. That's the one I was talking about before when I was talking about event forwarding. So here we want to use select board, and then on-click we are passing in nothing here. Okay, so we just do something like board.id, and then we want this to be an anonymous function as well. So select board we want to handle like this, and hopefully it should work now. Yes, it will. Amazing. So now we can handle that context menu. If I click rename now, it says yes, and here it says yes. So now we know that this is the button, this is the component that we are pressing. And of course there are multiple ways to solve this problem, but I feel like since we were warmed up with the stores, I felt like using some more stores just because they're awesome. So I felt like using stores today, but if you have another idea or something, if you feel like this is a really bad way to do it, feel free to comment if you have another better idea to solve this problem. So now we can actually show this, but how do we actually want to handle this renaming process? Well, we have this board name. Wouldn't it be nice to use the beloved content editable again? But we only want it to be content editable whenever, it is actually being edited. So like I said, we don't want to have content editable whenever we just click on the text. So maybe we can do something like that. If I do content editable, we only want to apply that if board is being renamed. So if I move this in here, let's see if that works out. Let's try that real quick. So if I do rename now, can I rename it? Yes, I can. Isn't that cool? So I also feel like we want to handle it, like actually start focusing on it. How do we want to handle that though? Will it start renaming itself? No, it will not. Okay. So we want to focus on that divider to start editing it, I believe. So I feel like we should actually use that reactive syntax that I was talking about earlier, so that we actually know whenever this value changes. If it is the current board ID, then we can start focusing on the element. So we can try implementing that real quick. So on rename a button or something like that. On rename button, we can try that, and then we pass in the string here, so that will be ID string, and then we can handle if ID is not board.id, then we can return early. We can kind of keep that content editable since it works, but now we also want to start focusing on it, so we can use our beloved bind this as well. So we're using a lot of techniques today. Bind this, we're gonna be binding that to like an element here, so we can do something like element, we can just do something like HTML div element or null, bind this, and that will be element. Maybe it will actually not be null, I'm not really sure like when it's mounted, and I'm assuming it's gonna be null, but I'm not sure. We can also check that here then, so or element is null, then we can return. Other than that, we can focus on it then. And then let's just use the reactive syntax, so on rename button, and then we can simply pass in rename board button. So whenever that value changes, this function is called. So yeah, that should be fine. Let's see if that works. So if I click that now, rename, absolutely nothing happened. Or did it work? Let's try again. If I start typing now, will it work? No, it won't. It kind of works, but not really. Okay, so let's see if I console log it, will it work? Let's see what happens if I rename. Yeah, so it will work here, but I need to add a small little timeout to that since it might not actually have content editable yet. So let's try that. Element focus 1, and let's see here now, will it work? Yes, it will. So that's quite nice. Now we can start editing it. Well, I feel like I should move this now to the end of the word here. So maybe I need to find out how to do that. So JS content editable, move caret to end. How to move cursor to end of content editable entity. All right. Okay, we're doing loads of stuff here. Select all. Wow, okay, there's so much code here. I don't feel like doing this today. Okay, add range focus, select all children. This one seems pretty small and straightforward, so let's try that out actually. Window get selection. Well, I guess I want to put this all in this timeout here, so we can do window set collection, get selection element. Then we can do element focus, of course. So element focus, let's try it out now again. Boom, and there we go. That is exactly what I wanted. Then of course we can remove the spell checking as well. Set that to false. Boom. Now I can start renaming it. Isn't that amazing? And just like before, we want to handle on blur. So whenever we focus out, we don't want it to be content editable anymore. We want to remove that rename border button. So if I do something like on name blur, do we have this already? No, it's just from a lot of other places that we have it from. So we can do something like on blur and assign to on name blur. And then I feel like we can do something like rename border button to null, and let's see if that works. So if I click that now and click somewhere else, I don't want to be able to rename it, and I cannot do that anymore. Amazing. And I also want to save it here, so we actually need to pass that on to the parent component now that I have saved that. But this also, we need to handle this in another way. We want to bind to text content, but we only want to bind it whenever we have content editable, and I don't think that is actually possible. You can't have, I don't think we can have this conditionally. It has to be true. If I just try binding text content to board.name, I feel like it's gonna complain. Yeah, content editable attribute cannot be dynamic if element uses two-way binding. So that's not gonna work out actually. I feel like we need to do this the old-fashioned way, which is gonna be pretty easy anyways, but we need to handle this another way. So we have board.name here. We need to get the inner text of the element and show it instead. So this is definitely not, two-way data binding at all. We're not going to be updating the internal value. So if I just try logging it out, I'm pretty sure that this will be static now. So if I rename this to like milk and click somewhere else, it's going to still say as that. So we can just set that here from the inner text. So we can do border.name, and that will be element.inner text, and hopefully that should work now. If I rename it again, set that to milk, boom, it says milk now. So we also want to pass this on to the parent component that we have changed this so that we can save it to local storage. Let's see if we can if we're handling that somewhere here. We can just handle it here, I believe. So, it's complaining about something. I'm not sure what it's complaining about. Element. Yeah, we don't want this to be a prop. I keep doing this so many times. Just a normal variable. Element. Yes. Then we can do something like this. So we can have like an on rename or something. So on. Well, it's more gonna be like on board renamed. So can handle that here. Well, no, actually it's gonna be on rename. It's just for the board list item. So then we can handle that. So, and then we can bind to that here. So on board rename, board list item, we want to dispatch here. We don't have a event dispatcher. So let's create that real quick. Dispatch rename, I believe. Yeah, on rename. And that's all on board renames. So now we want to pass that on to the parent components again. So we can just dispatch board renamed. We don't need to pass in any information. We're just going to be saving the state, all the state to local storage. That's how we're doing it currently. So no need to worry about that currently. But if we're going to be attaching a server to this, of course we're going to need to do that. We don't want to say like all the state. That's going to be a lot of bandwidth. So if we rename a board or something, we only want to send off that to the network. But we'll take that when we get there. So we have onboard renamed. It's complaining about the model again, but there's no problem really. We have board list done. So that's in app.svelte, I believe, or it's going to be in sidebar actually. So we just pass that on, I believe. So on board renamed, then we can handle that in app.svelte. So we're just doing something like on board renamed. We save that to local storage. Save to local storage. Now let's try renaming it here. So we call this milk and rename it, and boom, there we go. Milk has been saved. Isn't that amazing? So then we can actually rename it to something more appropriate, like personal instead of milk. We can call this homework instead or something like that. And boom, there we go. We have renamed them and it's all being persisted. And we can also remove them if we want. So if I add some dummy data here that I don't want anymore, we can just click that, right click that, and it amazingly deletes itself. But that shouldn't actually be saved really. Or yeah, actually it is going to be saved because we're handling it, a general approach. We have delete board that we're using. So it will actually be saved. Isn't that amazing? We have a general approach that we're using and it handles saving for us. Isn't that beautiful? So now we can change it in two ways. If you open it up, you can change it here, but if you're lazy, you just want to do it real quick, perhaps you're in homework, you get really bothered by this yay, then you can just rename it here and give it a proper name, or if you're really unhappy with it, you can just remove it and let it wipe it off the face of the earth, and boom, it is gone, and you don't have to see it anymore while you're doing your important homework. So absolutely amazing functionality that we implemented today. I feel like this was a pretty long episode, but we got a lot of functionality implemented. I mean, we got some really nice context menus, some really nice right-click menus with the help of Svelte. And it was pretty straightforward, but it was some complex scenarios that you can definitely solve in better ways or solve in different ways. So I'm really curious about your opinions. Feel free to comment what you thought of this episode, or if you have any improvement suggestions, or if you have any questions in general, I would love to hear them. And feel free to like or dislike depending on what you thought of the video. Also feel free to subscribe if you want to be part of this community that I'm trying to build. That would be amazing. But other than that, I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace out.